I have been on this mission for several decades, at least 3, fading into 4. And the mission continues to be transforming system blindness into system sight. And the background of that is, and I think this we all know, that we humans are the most social of social creatures. We are members in the widest range of human systems, and that is what my focus is, which is about human systems, collections of people in some kind of relationship with one another. And so it's all the way from our family to our organization, to our faith group, to the volunteer associations we're part of, to the meetings that we engage in. All of these are places in which we interact with others. And my work over these decades has demonstrated how blind we human beings are to the ways these systems shape our consciousness. They shape how we experience ourselves, how we experience other people, the effectiveness, all of this. And it is that blindness that is costly. It's that blindness is what costs us stress, personal. Blindness leads to broken relationships with others. Blindness leads to lost opportunities. Blindness leads to painful interactions within and across systems, all of that. So what we have been able to do over the years, by virtue of observing systems, largely through the Power Lab, through the organization workshop, my ability to stand outside of systems and watch how they interact, the opportunity to talk with people, to understand what is their experience when they are top, when they're bottom, when they're middle, when they're dominant, when they're other. People sharing with me all of that. And so everything that I know, all this simple cover of complexity, it really is what people have given to me by their participation. So that in time, I've come to see systems. I've come to see, it's like lifting the veil of system life, like this is us. And here we are interacting with one another. And some interactions are not going very well, and some are going well. And we're collaborative with these folks over here, and we're competitive with these folks over here. We've got some stress. We feel very close to these folks and distant from these folks. All of this is happening. And we have our judgments of people and our evaluations. This one we like, this one we don't like. All of those things fill our lives. And the thing is that all of these experiences and judgments and reactions, everything feels to us like reality. Like that, what I see is what is. And if I see you that way, that's because that's who you are. And one of the things we've learned is if you lift the veil on system life, we begin to get a very different picture of who we are and who these other people are. And so that even in this very short period of time, I want to take you on a bit of a tour of lifting the veil. So it's like this. When we lift the veil on our day-to-day interaction, see what the operating system of life is underneath, we see systems quite differently. We see systems as patterns of relationship and patterns of process. We see them as interactions that we are falling in and out of with people with great regularity. So I want to take you into that. And as I do this, it really will matter if you are not just a passive audience here, but as I talk, if you begin to put yourself into these places and see yourself moving in and out of these interactions as I talk. So here's one piece of this. One of the things is we see ourselves moving in and out of these systemic relationships. This is the one. Sometimes we're top. We have overall responsibility for the meeting, for the project, for the group, for the division, for the organization, for the country. And in other interactions, we're bottom. And all I mean by that is that we're a member. We're just a member in the team. We're a member in the project. We're a member. So that's one. And we'll come back. And then we have these interactions, which John was talking about, middleness, that we are often in this interaction in which, here we are in the middle, and over here we've got these two individuals or groups, and they are really looking to us to move their agendas ahead. Very important, and we're the one who has to take care of that. And sometimes those agendas are in conflict with one another. But that's it. But what's often more difficult for us to see is how often we are the end, and we are pushing on some middle to move our agenda ahead, aware or unaware of the fact that on the other side there is another end with equally pressing business on us. And sometimes these are vertical interactions. So the end up there, this is the top of the organization. It's got a new initiative going on, really important, and they are looking to middle, move this initiative ahead. But down here, we've got these folks, they're on the receiving end of the initiative. And it's not going so well. It's not going the way the top said it was going to be. And besides, they got their own business that they want to push middle on. So there's that. And we see ourselves sometimes there and sometimes there. And then the other interaction in which sometimes we are in these provider-customer relationships. Sometimes you are often the provider who is designated responsibility for providing some service to customer, and then other interactions, you're the customer on the receiving end. So here's the thing about system blindness and system sight. And that is, in all of these relationships, there is no reason why, no matter what side of the relationship we're on, there's no reason why we shouldn't be fully engaged with one another in creating a success. If I go to a meeting and you run the meeting, there's no reason why I shouldn't be as engaged in you in making that a successful meeting. If I'm in the provider-customer relationship, there's no reason why, even if I'm the customer, that I shouldn't be as engaged with you in providing a great service. Same with even in the end, middle end, wherever I am. There's no reason why we shouldn't be engaged together with coming up with the best possible resolution of this. So that's what the possibility is. But you see, problem is, we don't see what I just said. What we see is this, interacting with one another. We're not seeing these systemic relationships that we're falling in and out of. And so that blindness then has its consequences. And it goes something like this. In that top-bottom relationship, there is a shift in responsibility that nobody decides to do, but it just happens. Nobody says, I think we'll shift this responsibility. But what happens with great regularity, not always, not every time, but with great regularity, is responsibility, suddenly, bottom is not responsible, top is. It just happens. Now, if top continues to run a great meeting, there's no problem here. Bottom is not engaged with it, but it's a good meeting. If top is running a good project, no problem. It's okay. If top is running a good country's going well, no problem. But what happens when it goes sour, whenever the project now begins to weaken? So now we find a new set of characters that crop up. Suddenly, since bottom was never responsible for this, so now here we have that regular character of the poor oppressed bottom. Why am I stuck with this boring meeting? Why am I stuck with this project? This project is just, and I can talk to all my friends, all of us who are also feeling so oppressed by what those tops are not doing and what they're doing. And while that's happening, we got this new cast of characters up here at the top who's feeling so burdened, heavy with the responsibility, knowing things aren't going well, and feeling the burden of it. So there it goes. Remember, where this started. This starts with the possibility of partnership. We're totally engaged with one another on making it happen. Okay. Here's end, middle, end. With great regularity. Where does responsibility go? Suddenly, and notice, oh, that end holds middle responsible. Oh, that end holds middle responsible. Well, still not a problem, because like even here, we got a lot of these middles who really, know how to crank it out and do the work and serve that one and serve that one. And everybody is happy with all they're doing. And so there's no problem here. And both ends feel, well, it's okay. They're not particularly engaged, but as long as that middle is doing the job, we're all right. But what happens when middle flags? Well, neither end felt responsible for any of this, right? So what we have now is what? Familiar. Now we got these disappointed ends. Where did I ever get these weak, ineffective, wishy-washy middles? I don't understand. You just give them an assignment and boy, that's it. And of course then you have the end in here, who is feeling responsible for the failure, feeling weak, torn, ineffective, knowing not satisfying anyone, and all of that. Keep understanding where this comes from. Now we have different casts of characters here than partners. Same with provider customer. Oh, not always, not every time. Responsibility. No, as long as you as provider, and a lot of you are providers, as long as you continue to provide this great service, they're all happy with you. They may not feel responsible for it, but what happens when service begins to fail? They're not feeling responsible for failure, right? You are. So now we have the unfairly judged provider and the righteously screwed customer. God almighty, I was the customer. I had all this, and look at how they dealt with me. Okay. System blindness. This is every day. It's not talking about big earth-shaking opportunities. Everyday interactions. With system blindness, what do we got? Stress. Notice in each of those scenarios, everybody is under stress. Broken relationships, partnership gone. Diminished contribution in each of those. Whatever they were working on jointly is suffering from what's happened in the relationship. A lot of finger pointing and blame. And the key is cluelessness. That is, no one knows how this happened. It just happened. So here is trying to boil it down to system blindness versus system sight. With system blindness, when we get into these interactions with one another, the problem that I'm having with you seems very specific to us, to you, to me, the situation that we're in. But the real possibility for us is when we have system sight, we begin to see that what's happening is not just about you and me, but this is a recurring pattern, a pattern that happens with great regularity, a pattern that happens regularly in top, bottom, end to middle end, and provider-customer relationships. Now, there's a lot of leverage right there. Once the difference is between seeing something as between you and me versus seeing it as something that happens in these kinds of relationships, that gives us some leverage. In system blindness, how I'm feeling about you is, I experience that as reality. That's who you are. If I see you as incompetent, as weak, as blaming or whatever, it's only because that's who you are. So stay with this. And with system sight, we understand that the feelings that we're having about one another are the result of the relationship that we have fallen into. It's not particularly about you. It's about the relationship that we've fallen into. Now we're going to see this again and again. In system blindness, the solution is change the people. We've got to get a better class of tops. We've got to get more effective middles going in here. We've got to get better providers. Fix, fire, rotate, divorce, separate, provide therapy for. Any way we can fix individuals. With system sight, the notion is what we need to do is change the pattern. Once we begin to regularly see ourselves in these relationships, every day in interaction, sometimes on one side and sometimes on the other, the question is, when you're feeling burdened, when you're feeling oppressed, when you're feeling righteously screwed, when you're feeling unfairly judged, when you're feeling torn in the middle, when you're feeling like you've got this weak, disappointed middle, ask yourself, what relationship are we in? What systemic relationship are we in right now? Where is responsibility in that relationship? Have I moved it over to others and it's not with me? Or have I pulled it up to myself and away from others? What's the consequence of the dance that we're in right now? And if you care to change it, you can begin to change it. You begin to say, how do I begin to shift responsibility in here? So that's what's possible. That's what's possible. Now, this is a little more difficult shift for us to make, because it's how do we see the whole of which we're a part? How can you see your family as a system? How can you see your organization as a system? Can a bee understand the hive, or does a bee just go about buzzing, buzzing, buzzing? But that is a challenge. How do we see the whole? Now again, in the work that we've done over these several decades, we have begun to see what systems do, what the whole systems do. And it goes something like this. And again, as I do this, you can think about your family, work group, whatever, what the whole systems do. Well, whole systems individuate. That is, where the parts move separately from one another, going their own way, free, doing whatever. And they also integrate, where the parts now come together, interacting with one another, supporting one another in the common work that we're doing. So looking at it, this tension between sometimes we're separate, sometimes we are together, interacting with one another. I want to stay with that because we'll take a look at how this plays out. And whole systems differentiate. Now, I apologize for the words. We've never been able to come up with a better language for it. But it gets clear. What it means by whole systems differentiating is it means that the whole looks for a variety of processes for dealing with this environment, for coping with the dangers out there, for taking advantage of its possibilities. And whole systems homogenize. What I mean by that is they work on sharing information with one another, sharing throughout the system, sharing values throughout. So again, there is that tension between differentiating, elaborating our differences, and working on our commonality. So here is the point. That's like the ABCs. That's like the DNA of systems. But from those four processes comes all the relationship issues that develop in system life, depending on how intensely they're pursued, which processes are dominate, and which ones are submerged, and all of that. And so I want to illuminate that for you now, and bear with me, because I think the difference, if you begin to see this, it gives you an immense amount of leverage in dealing with the system, organizational systems that you're in, and every place else. So here, hang with it. If you look at your organization, and we say, you know, the organization as a system, but the more you understand organization, you see that really you have three different systems within the system of the organization. Three very different lives going on here at the top, on the bottom, and in the middle. Each of those is existing in its own immediate environment with its own challenges and opportunities. So for instance, the tops are living, that this top system is living in a world of complexity and accountability. Any top will tell you that. It's a world with lots of issues to deal with, difficult issues, complex issues, issues within the organization, but also the outside world is coming in on us. New competition is coming up, new technology is coming in, new workforce is coming in. All of that is the world that we're dealing with there. Now, in that same organization, these folks on the bottom are living in a very different world. They're living in a world of vulnerability. Stuff is just coming down to us from them. They got these new initiatives that are sort of laying down on us, new changes coming in, all of that happening, and without our involvement in it. And there's a lot of uncertainty down there too. What's the future for us in this organization? Is there going to be a merger? Are there going to be shipping jobs overseas? All of this unknown to us. So that's a very different world. And the middles are living in a still different world. They're living in a world that pulls them apart from one another. You go off there and you go off there and you take care of that group that you're leading or managing or coaching, whatever. Now here's my point. Again, there's no reason why any of those systems can be anything other than a powerful system. What I mean by that is each of them has the possibility of being a robust system in the I don't care, even if it's the bottom who are dealing with vulnerability, the middles with tiering, the tops in complexity. What does it mean to be a robust system? It means to have outstanding ability to deal with whatever there is in your environment. Whether it's how do we have, in the bottom place, how do we deal with our vulnerability here? In the middle place, how do we deal with the world that pulls us apart? In the top, how do we deal with all this complexity that's on us? And I'm saying that in each of those worlds, it is possible for us to develop outstanding capacity for doing that. And the way we do that is like this. That is, the robust system is highly differentiated. And you need to always ask yourself, in the systems that you're in, what I mean by that is, you can be in a system that has a lot of different strategies for survival. But does it explore new possibilities? Or are you stuck on the old strategies? A highly robust system is one in which we are constantly evaluating, we're constantly finding new ways to cope with the dangers out there and to prospect among the opportunities. That's what that is. But the robust system is also zestfully homogenized. That is, that we work with great energy on working on our commonality. What is the vision of this system? Is that vision deeply embedded throughout the system? That's what we mean by that. Are we sharing information? Are we sharing experiences with one another? And the robust system is zestfully individuated. And what I mean by that is people are not hiding in here. People are using their unique strengths, abilities, temperaments. They are risking themselves out, exploring, doing, testing. Now we're talking about a system that is robust internally. You know how rarely that is, how much the research is saying that there is so much disengagement in organizations, so much wasted energy, people who have tremendous capacity for liveliness that are basically using 10% of what they've got. And part of that is their own choice. Part of that is the unwillingness to risk, to move, to say, here's my difference, here's what I have to offer, here's what's unique. Let me get out there and do that, and then bring that capacity back to the system. And the robust system is zestfully integrated. That means people are able to regularly come together in various configurations, working together on whatever project has come up right now, feeding and supporting one another in that service. Now, if you can do that in any of these systems that you're in, you will create a very powerful, this is not just words, that's your action agenda. How do we do that? How do we continue to explore those particular processes and pursue them, what? Zestfully. That means intentionally, not just happening to us. That's what's possible. Now, here, test this out. Here's a little illumination, I hope, coming. Because you now know what these underlying system processes are. But in day-to-day life, we don't see them. In day-to-day life, what happens is, when we're in the top world, we bump into that world of complexity and accountability. In the bottom world, we're just vulnerable. In the middle world, we're there. And so what happens to us with great regularity is we just reflexively adapt to the condition that we're in. And what happens, and I'll note, you'll see it, when we do that, certain of those four processes now become dominant, and others of them go away. And once that happens, that's when all the trouble begins. And if you could see it, you'll see how it goes. So for example, in this top world, what a great team we'll make. You know, we love one another. And we're just perfect for making this whole thing happen. And then we enter that top world of complexity and accountability. Not paying attention, without any choice, we just simply differentiate. There it is. We don't decide to do that. We have to do that in order to survive. You take this, you take that. You wash, I'll wipe. You take care of the kids, I'll take care of foreign policy, whatever. So there's no problem there. The problem then comes in because of reflexively, without awareness or choice, we now harden in those differentiations. So those differentiations now become what? They become territories, right? Now here's the point, it's short, and that is this. Structure shapes our consciousness. Once we fall into that structure, our consciousness now shifts to what we call a mind mentality, M-I-N-E, mind. That is, this is my territory, that's your territory. We become defensive and protective of our territory. We're not necessarily sharing honest information across. We get into a lot of personal issues. Who's got the most important part of this operation and who's got the less important part of this operation? All of those personal things that come out that really, are the consequence of the structure that we have fallen into. No, again, nobody's aware of that. It's all happening, feels very real. Whatever problems I'm having with you is because of who you are. That's obvious, any fool would know. Let's look at the bottom world. Same people say the world is, say there really is reincarnation. You start off in the top world, next life you're in the bottom world. Same people, but you're gonna have a very different experience. So now, here you are in this world of vulnerability with them doing stuff to you, and again, reflexively, not out of choice, reflexively, we coalesce. Well, what is coalescing? Coalescing is homogenizing. Individual I's now just automatically become a collective we, right? Now the language is we, and now it's integration. We share resources with one another. Well, that makes sense. It is the next step. Now we harden in that we-ness. And so now look at what's happening now. We used to be in potential relationship with one another. But now that wall separates us from the rest of the organization. Now when you talk to those people and you say, what's the organization? Are you part of the organization? They say, oh yeah, absolutely, I'm part of the organization. That's what I'm part of. But I'm not part of that whole other deal. So you talk about disengagement, loss of contribution, all of that automatically goes. But that wall not only separates us from them, it also does what? It entraps us in here. So now there's lots of pressures on us to stay in the we, to agree with one another. Don't step too far out of line. Don't take, it's all about in here. And so we get all of that stuff about people being seen as traitors, people being seen as scabs, things like that. Whoever dares to move out of the we. So does that. Again, what's the basic principle? What happened? Structure shapes consciousness. Once we blindly fall into structure, then that's the consciousness that we now fall into. And we don't see that. We think it's real. We think it's reality. One last. Here we are, same guy, third life. Maybe I was thinking sometime we could do it like, what is it, the Christmas Carol? You keep waking up 3 times in the course of the evening, and now you're in the middle world. And so here's what happens here. Now, the world that they're coping with is one that pulls them apart from one another, out towards those individuals, groups that you are supposed to lead, coach, manage, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we adapt. You get the message? We adapt. Not choosing, just reflexively, we adapt. How do we adapt? We go out and do what we're supposed to do. This is what we're hired to do. Lead, manage, coach, et cetera. That's fine. What happens next? We harden in that adaptation. Now, talk about how structure shapes consciousness. Now the consciousness, we were we were mine, now we're what? I. Now it's all separate, but by separateness, I now feel unique. I now feel like I don't have anything in common with these people, but I also feel very competitive with them. I'm wondering, who am I doing better than? Who am I better off than? How are we doing in here? I also tend to feel a value to them, seeing them on surface issues. This one is too emotional, this one is too whatever. All of that in my I-ness just fall into that. System blindness. Stress everywhere in that relationship. There is nobody who's stress-free in any of those scenarios. Broken relationships. diminished contributions, finger pointing and blame, and our ever popular cluelessness. And you understand what I mean by that, which is nobody sees how it happened, our part in having created it from happening. Okay. System blindness. If you talk to any tops about the issues they're having with one another, they're absolutely certain that whatever those issues are specific to the people involved and to the situation they're in. It gives us some real thought and leverage when we start to say, wait a minute, that's what happens with great regularity to people in the top world. If middles suddenly are in here and say, yeah, that's how we feel about one another, it's not about who you are. It's what happens with great regularity when we are in that middle space and when we let that happen. Any feelings I have are felt to be a reflection of reality. If I see you the way I see you, it's because that's who you are. That's how we are as humans. And this is the point again and again. How I see you is the result of the relationship we have fallen into. It's not who you are. If you're in a different pattern, you'd look very differently to me. Well, that's the point. Again and again, the solution in system blindness is change people, fix them, train them, rotate them, divorce them, separate from them, therapy for them, anything but change them. In system sight, the issue is change the pattern that we're in. Now, I know what I'm saying to you now, you can make the rest of your career going into depth, and I'm just giving you the beginning challenge. But what does it mean? It means from blindness to sight, we have to begin to see the whole and what it is. We have to begin to see what processes are dominant and what's missing. In that top world, when top starts to get the insight that what's missing here is homogenization. What's missing here is our sharing of information, our integrating with one another. While in the absence of that, then we're falling into this. So what processes are dominant, what are missing, what are the consequences? Same with middle. If middle listens to this, a group of middles, I've seen it happen again and again in a room, we're sitting there and all of a sudden, I don't have any contact with those folks. I just come in and do this, or a little longer version of this. And it says, yeah, that's exactly what's happening to us. So obviously, this is not just about us, this is about what was happening to us in that middle space. And so what's missing in that middle space? How do we then begin to integrate with one another? How do we begin to connect with one another? Find out that we do in fact have a lot in common. That there are important things that we could be sharing with one another. And that by integrating with one another, we strengthen ourselves as we go back out into the world. We begin to see that possibility. That's the challenge. I started this second part by telling you that every one of these systems has the potential of being a robust system. But in order to do that, we have to see what's not happening and then how do we strengthen it and so. Okay, so this is coming to the end of our tour. You always say where we've been. Well, we've been there. Mm-hmm. We say, okay, that's important for us. That's important for us to really become aware of those relationships we're moving in and out of. Noticing what's happening to us and others in those relationships. How do we stay in partnership around that? How do we avoid falling into, burdened, depressed, etc. And then now we've also looked at this and begin to see our systems as wholes. Now here's the thing, 20 minutes talking to you, all I can hope is you get a little bit of curiosity about exploring these things more in your own lives. But there's two elements to this. One is, I believe it was Dr. Deming talked about, there's such a thing as powerful knowledge. And even though this is brief and all of that, this is very powerful knowledge about the nature of systems, about what we normally are blind to and what the consequences are. So something is like conceptual. Okay, I got the concept and I can see where I go. But always the other item is emotional. Do I believe this? I mean, the way I see the world seems so solid to me. How can it not be that way? That the only way you know that this really is so is when you begin to change the relationship. And if there is one fundamental principle of it all, it's this, which is, whoops, sorry, it's this. That's the issue. The structure that we blindly fall into is what shapes our consciousness. And the leverage is to see that and to be in the place where we can begin to change that structure. And, you know, just briefly, a top looks down on his middle group and says, oh, that's very interesting, but not with those middles. They're what a bunch of screw-ups they are. I mean, you see what they've handled with regard to the initiative. He says, if we had a different class of middles in here, we could really make this operation hum. What top needs to see is those middles are potentially quite a different collection of people if they were changing the pattern of their interaction with one another. And if you supported that change, you would see another class of people. Suddenly, miraculously, it would begin to show up. It's that kind of thing. And middles need to believe that too. Is that right? Is Oshry right? Is that what he's saying? You mean if we begin to integrate with one another, seriously do that, get together, share resources with one another, etc., would it change? I say, try it. Okay, that is it. That's your 20-minute review.